Hello and welcome to our inaugural episode of Gamer Lunch. I'm Bryce Whitaker here with our very special guest, game designer Silvano Sorrentino. It's nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Bryce. Thank you for having me. Doing great.
We are so pleased to have you here today. For those that don't know, Silvano is a Italian game designer who has worked on titles such as Deckscape and Detective in our own line at DV Jockey Games. And we're going to jump right into here. If you have questions for Silvano, please post them in the YouTube chat or the Discord chat. But let's start at the beginning, Silvano. When was it and what were you playing when you decided to be a game designer?
So this is a two-sided question because on one end, I always been a game designer. And on the other end, at some point, I started becoming a modern game designer, an actual game designer. So let's start from the start.
Okay.
As I was saying, I think I've always been a game designer because I found some games from when I was 11 years old.
Look at that. Look at that.
Oh, look. And I was shocked because I found this in the last few days that I already wrote some games with English titles. So I was already ready for the international market for some reason.
Now let me ask you, with Treasure Quest, what was the goal? What were the players doing in Treasure Quest?
I think your goal is to find the treasure, but the nice thing is at the time I thought I will never forget the rules. So I have the board, I have some pieces, I have a lot of different monsters and stuff, but I have no idea of how it was played.
That is fantastic. And you were your own art director too at this time.
Yes, I was pretty good when I was a kid. Then I forgot everything.
Wow, those are so cool.
And I think at the time this was a mix of two things. Games I played with my friends and parents in the other house that my parents wouldn't buy me. And also probably something I saw in the ads of the magazines of the time. So I imagined how they would work up, and I tried to write something in the genre.
Now, were your parents were they interested in games? Did they play a lot of games, or just a little bit of games, or how was that growing up?
Well, I actually played a lot of classic games with my parents, mostly card games with my dad, and but they always bought me games since I was a kid because probably they thought this was a nice hobby to have.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When I was a kid, my parents were into video games. It was Pac-Man Fever, but there was a game on the Atari that killed gaming for them for the rest of their lives. It was Indiana Jones, the Atari cartridge. They hated it. They couldn't finish it, and would never play another game for the rest of their lives. Okay, well, let me ask you a little bit here. Okay, so you were a young kid and you were obviously into game design. What was some of your first professional projects? What did you work on early on?
Well, the breakthrough for me is when at the end of last century, so last millennium, a magazine, a gaming magazine, came to Italy. It was called Giocaria, which means like a play area. And this is where I discovered the reviews for the first modern kind of games.
Okay.
Something like Settlers of Catan or Catan, how it's called now, and then later the classics of the era like Carcassonne and stuff. So I already was I never stopped writing games, but I didn't know the new ones. So my games, like most newbie game designers, were based on the classics. Something that resembles Monopoly, something that resembles Risk, etc.
Sure.
Even I, just let me show you another game of my 12s. I wrote something that is a detective game. So we will
Wow.
a murder mystery game with all the characters, etc. But I think this also was copied from something I played at the time. I have little memories of probably some Mickey Mouse detective game that was given as a freebie with something, and I probably copied the idea. So the first step of me was just being a game inventor, not a game designer.
Okay.
Meaning I try to come up with something that is mine, but is based on someone else's work.
That's interesting because I think in game design, when we start out, it's because we like to tinker with something. It's not quite what we want, but we love it. I know with Axis and Allies, that was my thing. I loved the recreating World War II, but we played it so much that we were just looking for little differences, and that's how a love of game design develops, because you're just trying to create little differences, and you start with that, and then you move on to your own stuff. Let's talk a little bit about Detective and Deckscape. Now, you work with another game designer, Martino, and sometimes game designers like to work alone. Sometimes game designers like to collaborate. Which do you prefer as a game designer?
I don't think I have a preference actually, because
Okay.
both their pros and cons. When you work with someone else, it's easier to get fuel and continue working on something. But if you work by yourself, you can work at any time, because you don't have to set up a meeting or talk with the other author. So I actually like both. So if you want to go in chronological order, my first games, after I started knowing the games reviewed by Giocaria, I wrote them myself. And the main reason to write my first games is because I hated some kind of games and I wanted to fix it in my mind. So my very first game is called Ostragon. This is pretty rare, actually. I mean, and it came from the idea that I wanted. I love trivia games, but I hate two things about trivia games. The first one is that at some point you are put on the spotlight, so it's your turn to give the answer, and maybe you feel a little ignorant because you don't know the actual answer, and you feel you are not actually playing. You are like answering questions. It's not always fun. And the other thing is, I hated that if you buy trivia games, the questions end at some point. You have your cards with your questions, and if you play it several times, at some point you will remember the answers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come up with a game when you create the trivia on the fly.
Okay.
So this game was a game when you ask any kind of, let's say, trivia, but it's actually an open question, like, do you prefer pizza or chips? And the other players choose one of the two answers, and you must bet of which one is the preferred answer. But the twist is, if you get it right, you score as many points as the other answer. So if 5 people say pizza and 1 people say chips, and I get pizza right, I only score 1 point. So you want to make it half and half, but still go to the right side.
Yeah, that's interesting. I played a game not too long ago that was very similar, and you had to say the word that nobody else would guess, and if there was another one out there, you didn't score. Which is kind of the same thought process that goes through a game like this. Obviously, the more you know people, the better off you are.
Yeah. And so you don't have to actually know anything, and you also have the fun to create the questions. There is another game recently that is based on a similar idea by Vlada Chvatil, how do you pronounce it? I'm not really sure. Which is called That's a Question, which is like the similar genre.
Sure.
And if you want to know something that I learned from each of my games, in this case, the lesson was that this came in a very little box, but this is actually a party game for many players, for up to 12 players. So probably at the time, the little box was not the best idea, because people think that if you want a party game, you want a big box you can take to a dinner or to a party. So I put a lot of trouble in making a big game into a small box, but if I have to write it again right now, I will do it in a large box, and Divu Jockey will always do this in a large box. So you live, you learn.
Yeah, I mean that's a little bit about how we market the experience to the players. Let me get into a little bit following up on that. What big lessons have you learned in game design as your career has gone on? Are there any big things that you said, oh, I won't do this again, or I should have done this, or maybe there's a new game design that you're interested in pursuing now? What are those big milestones?
Well, one is that, of course, playtest is the most important thing. And for my first games, sometimes they weren't playtested a lot. They do work because they were simpler games. But right now, I think the major resource is having a large group of playtesters. And this is a little difficult during this year for the reasons we all know. but we have to find a way to do this.
I think that's particularly important when we talk about Detective and Deckscape, because these are logic puzzles.
Yeah.
And aren't they the hardest thing to write, because you have to make sure that you're in the mind of the people playing, and that they don't come up with other options or find something that doesn't seem reasonable. So you need all that playtest. Is that how that works?
Yes, this is exactly the first problem we have with every puzzle in the two games, because the escape is like an escape room in a box, while Detective is a murder mystery in a box. But they both are games where you have some puzzles to solve. And in a way, the escape is a little easier to write, because it's different puzzles, like 20 to 30 puzzles for each box. And so in some cases, you can test a single puzzle by sending it to our first playtesters. We have some WhatsApp groups of playtesters, and we send them the first ideas. So some of the puzzles you can test it this way. And if they come with some ideas that might work, our goal is not just say, this is a nice idea, but it's not the correct answer because it's not very correct. If someone comes with something that sounds like a good solution to the puzzle, something is wrong, and we have to put something else, maybe by changing the wording of the puzzle so it's easier what we are trying to accomplish, or by changing the illustration, or in many cases by throwing this in the bin and starting from scratch, because in some cases it's much better to do this.
So you would say in a game, particularly like Deckscape, that it requires from the game designer kind of a constant review. Do you review the game more than your other game designs from feedback from the playtesters?
Yes, both Deckscape and Detective are very particular projects, because you really need to follow the process until the end, because there are several steps. You first write the puzzles, then you come up with the prototype that contains on the puzzles, and some of those puzzles you cannot test by themselves, so they only work in the context of the story, because the puzzles are always connected to the story. So in some cases you cannot just understand what the puzzle is trying to say if you do not know what you are doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we come up with some pretty basic prototype with some illustration that me and Martino get from Google and trying to come up with a nice prototype that is functioning, just to test if the puzzles are working. And this is where we do most of the first round of playtests with
how many people out there might be interested to know how many playtesters does a company like DV have working on these games? Is it a dozen? Is it 50? I mean, what is the number of playtesters?
For these games, we actually do several rounds of playtest in different parts of the world, because
okay. Yeah.
I live in Italy, but I do not live where the Vujoki offices are in Perugia. So I am in Bari, the Vujoki is in Perugia, and my co-author Martino lives in Germany. So each one of us has a different set of playtesters. So usually, me and Martino used to playtest the first version of the prototypes with the place order graphics, just to test if the puzzle work. And then it goes to Perugia after usually 3 or 4 passes is what we need to come up from the first prototype to the one that feels right. Because playtesters used to give us their comments to we see there's something in the story that is not going very, very well, etc. So we perform some changes. And usually the version that arrives in the offices of the Vujoki is not the first one, is usually the third or fourth one. But at that point, we are pretty confident that the game is going to work.
And then, so, go ahead. No, I was just going to ask. So another thing that is important, I think, that all the people know is, because this is an international game, is there a line of thinking that exists that's different from Italians and Americans or Germans and French? In your playtesting, do you come across where you have to convey an idea differently, or try to get to the universal understanding? How does that process work with all the countries and all the playtesters and all their thinking?
Yes, it's most the universal way, meaning we have some kind of puzzles that we try to avoid at all costs, like word games, anagrams, that kind of stuff, because they will become very difficult to translate. And during the first phases, after we complete the prototype, most of our partners receive a copy of the prototype, so they can test the game and see if they like it, if it will work in their country, etc. So sometimes we also get feedbacks from the editors of the other publishers in other countries, which work with us.
Yeah, that's pretty valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we put everything in the game as we continue production. We are very lucky because we are working with the same graphic designer and the same illustrator since the first Deckscape game. So now we really can connect. In Perugia, we have Matteo Bustenghi, who creates all the templates and the graphics for the game. And we always have the same illustrator, which is Alberto Bontempi, which also lives in a different city. So it's 4 corners in 4 different cities. And
that's great.
Yeah.
I have to say, I really do love the art. And in Deckscape, it is so cool how you came up with the idea to use the box and put in
detective.
Detective. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you put in the cards for the 3D crime scene, and it's beautiful. Every game is beautiful. So big shout out to those guys in their work in your art department here, because these are just lovely games to look at. And I have mine is sealed, so I can't pop it out. But if you go online, anybody can see how beautiful the crime scenes are, and it makes this great visual for the games. They're just fascinating. So let's talk a little bit, Silvano, about if I'm a young game designer and I come along and say, man, I really love Detective. Detective is the game that is going to get me. I want to be a game designer because of it. What can I do? What advice would you give younger people who want to get into game design?
So it's a little difficult for me to give advice that goes around the world. If you ask for here in Italy, I will say just join some Facebook groups of game designer. I know there are several around the world, but I don't know what you have in America and what you have around the world. And also try to join some game design contests. We also have one from Divu Jockey, which is international, which is called Gioco Inedito, which meaning unpublished game. So you can submit your unpublished game ideas. And each year we have a team. Last year it was chocolate. This year it was contemporary art. And this is a nice idea because most of the game design contests have some strict rules about the kind of game you have to create. So in this case, for example, it's a card game with a team, with a particular team. So you also have to think like a game designer that gets a commission and not only create your own game. Because I think everyone is able to invent a game. Literally everyone, and everyone does when he's a kid. The switch is becoming a game designer, starting from a game inventor. And you also have to think about the final product. You have to study a lot of things, how to do it, the interface of the game. Sure. I also always say that game design is the boring part that comes after inventing a game.
That's great.
Of course, I love every part of the design, but the starting idea, when you get the idea and you create your first prototype, is really creative work, and you feel some kind of sensations. And when you start getting the feedback from the players, start writing each card with a very specific wording, etc. It's still the best job on the planet, but it's two different things: inventing and refining a game.
That's great. That's great advice. That's a great way of looking at everything. Let's talk a little bit about. I know we've had discussions before, and I've mentioned that in the creative process of game design, like what was broken down to me, the most useful information I ever got was from John Cleese, the British comedian, who in a lecture about creativity talked about the open mode, where you play with ideas and you're designing games, and the closed mode where you set that aside and you're just sort of living your life. And I was very frustrated in my early game design work because I tried to power through the open design, and I would never go back to a closed mode where I was just going on with my life. I would obsess about problems, and it mentally was frustrating. How do you work through your game design blocks or problems? How do you attack that problem?
I think Monty Python are always right, because John Cleese was right about it. But the missing part is that the open and close parts of the thinking are actually connected, meaning that you can think of something in the background. So you go on with your life, and at some point you will get the right idea. But first you have to think very hard about the problem. So you have to work a lot. And when you come to a block, you just need to stop and start thinking about something else. But not for minutes or for hours. Maybe also for days or for weeks.
Do you
You
think
start
that
working on other parts of the game.
Yeah. Do you think that distraction by saying I'm gonna go over here and do something else, but you're saying it's still in the back of your head?
Yes,
So
I am convinced about it.
yeah. So do you think that distraction is what kind of switches it and makes it? Where do you find your eureka moments? Do you find them in the open mode or the closed mode?
Mostly in the close mode, actually. And I read it in a book. I don't remember the actual name of the book. Maybe a way, I don't remember. But this is what it says, that your brain is working in the background. And I'm convinced, because some of my best ideas like popped out from nothing when I was doing totally something else. And the first time you think like you are lucky, this idea pops in your head from nothing. But then I realized, after reading a book about this, that you made it pop, because like your brain is thinking in the background of something, and when he has the chance, it will give you the full idea. But it's your brain working on the idea. It does not come from air.
That's great. That's a great way to describe those issues. Was there ever a particular mechanic, or well, let's just say mechanic? Was there ever a particular mechanic that you were really proud of, that just worked, everybody loved it, and you loved it, that you did in your game design work?
The first one is one from my very first game, Ostracon, and it was a little fun, because as I told you, the rule there is that if you guess the majority, you score as many points as the minority. But to get to this very simple rule, I started writing a very complex rule. Something like, okay, you scored the number of people plus the number minus the number. At some points, I started, oh, okay, this goes out without this with this with. Oh, but it says you score B if you guess A. Oh, that's cool. So it was like a math equation. And at some point, I discovered that you can just write it with a one-line rule. And that was the first time I was very proud of something I wrote.
Yeah, I find in game design, the moment in which you complicate things, the moment you have to kind of step back, and I always like to. I don't know if you do this, but I design in layers, where you start with a very basic mechanic, and then you add a little something, and you add a little something. It sounds like you're really for the idea of when you get complex, go smaller, or think about the project. Do you design in layers?
Well, it depends on the games. I usually prefer to play and also to write games that look simple. So they do not have many layers of complexity, at least if you look from the outside. But sometimes complexity is hidden in the game.
Yeah.
For example, if you the main idea of the Deckscape puzzle checking mechanic is that you have one question, and then you give the answer together with your fellow players, and then you just flip the card and see the answer on the other side. This looks like the simplest idea ever, but we came up with several different ideas, creating a wheel to check the solution, having a book to check the solution, etc. until we came up to this, which looks like the simplest one, but it came after a very long thought, because we thought this will make us free to create any kind of puzzle without having an interface to input the solution.
Yeah, and that interface could be take too long, distracting. Yeah,
exactly.
That's the brilliance of Dexcape. Besides the fact that you don't need a rule book, is you go through it and it's quick. It keeps you running. Yeah.
And the fun fact is that while we were creating the first prototype of Dexcape, there were no other escape room games on the market, except for large games like the Think Fun series of games, and the Werewolf Experiment, which was a big box game that was then reprinted by Mattel, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But they were more like a recreation of the actual escape room, meaning you find a lot of different pieces and puzzle inside the box. The Werewolf Experiment also has actual locks that close actual little suitcases, etc.
That's really neat. I like that. Yeah.
So our idea is to create a card game based on escape rooms, and at the time there was no exit games, no unlock games, and they were announced while we were working on our games, because the idea was in the air.
Yeah.
And it's fun to see how, starting from the same idea, different designers came up with very different games.
Yeah, it is. That's a lot like the social deduction resistance werewolf stuff. They do kind of go start. Everybody was on the board with werewolf, and then it just goes off into some really cool branches. Let's check some questions here. Barbara wanted to ask you, I'm curious, how do you find inspiration for new Dexcape settings? And is it the same for detective settings?
Okay, that's a good question, and let's tackle one at a time. For Dexcape, it comes from different sources, actually. We started with the most common theme for an escape room, which is the laboratory with the mad scientist, etc. in the first one. And then we basically do two things. One is starting to find other themes that are popular and common, like Escape from Alcatraz. And on the other hand, we wanted to put some of our ideas to create something that we really like as designers, like the theft in Venice, or one with the magicians. And we want. One thing is that we really like to have some themes that are challenging also for us. Meaning, the best example I can find is the Mystery for El Dorado, which is the fourth box, I guess. And that was one theme that we chose for a particular reason. We wanted to get rid of all the classic escape room puzzles, where you have some locks, when you have some numbers, something written on the wall, etc. So we wanted a theme set in a world where there are no numbers, where there are nothing you can read because it's not written in your language, etc. And this forces us to come up with different ideas. And this also happened with other Dexcapes, like when we decided to do what is the first, as far as I know, team versus team escape room, the crew versus crew game, and which creates a lot of difficulties for us as designers, because we have to find a way for two teams or two players to play the same puzzle at the same time, and also to talk with the people in your team without revealing anything. So we have to find several ways to do this. like having puzzles that are similar but not exactly the same, or having some micro games where you can play one at a time until you find the solution, etc. So the first thing we do is try to challenge ourselves with a team or with some restrictions to come up with new ideas. Otherwise, we will get bored, and if we are bored, the players will get bored, of course.
Yeah. Just kind of speaking of crew versus crew, that's going to release in April in the States, in North America, and we are eagerly awaiting it. Every day someone says, "I can't wait to play crew versus crew." Was that particularly hard to play test in the pandemic?
Luckily, when we play tested the first version of Q vs. Q, there was no ongoing pandemic because it takes months or more than a year to play test the first version of the game. So this was in the pipeline, and we were lucky enough to play test in Ludotex or with friends at the time.
That's great.
We had this problem with the next Deckscapes and Detectives. We weren't announced yet, but we found ways to tackle it, either or by giving the games to some group of people living together, like families or friends, etc., or playing it in the office, or playing via Zoom. There were several strategies to do this.
Okay, as we're about to wrap up, I just want to ask you one thing. There is a game that you showed me before, and if you have the box, I would love you to show the people out there. It's one of your designs called Dancing Dice.
Yeah, this is one of the first games I wrote for Divu Jockey.
I think that is
when it still had the old logo and the old game name, Da Vinci.
How about that? Da Vinci, there it is.
Yeah, this is.
I never got to see that game. What was that? What did you do in that game? What was the idea?
This is set in a dancing marathon, and this also came from in a game I really didn't like and I wanted to fix in my mind.
Okay.
Which is any kind of game when you roll the dice and you compare the scores, like Yahtzee or poker dice or something like that. So in this game you play with 6 dice, which are very nice dice. I can show you.
Oh yeah, look at that. They got little feet on them for dancing.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Pretty cool. So you throw 6 dice, you can rethrow once, and the two ideas are that you create 2 different combinations with 6 dice. So if you add a very bad throw, you can still create one good combination and one which is yeah.
Okay.
And then compare with the others. And the other idea is that having a triple 1, triple 2, or triple 3 are the best combinations.
Okay.
And then the sum of the dice are the other combination. So
yeah,
the ones are the worst dice usually, but if you get 3 of them, you have the best combination. So you when you throw it, you have 2 tactical decisions. Decide if you want to throw the dice, and decide if you want to create 2 medium combination or one strong and one which is not strong enough, and then you compare the first and the second. I'm not sure if this is something I will design the same way right now, like 20 years after, but later. But I was pretty proud of the game at the time because it works very well and it's fun.
That's great. I thought it was a neat box. I thought dancing was kind of an interesting theme to build a game around. As we're about to wrap up here, I would just like to ask: is there any topic you want to bring up or tell people we could talk about?
No, but I just remember I didn't answer to the other question by Barbara, which is the detective settings.
Yeah.
Maybe she wants to know. And yes, the detectives are a little harder to write actually, because everything is connected in that game. The 3D crime scene and the case, the story, and the questions in the end. So you have to put the whole story in your mind. If you write an escape room game like the Escape, you can go by different steps. Okay, we are here right now. We want to write puzzles for this part of the story. But detective is like writing a short murder mystery novel, and first you have to have the whole story in your mind. So the first thing we do is me and Martino talk for hours during the night of ways how to kill people, what kind of poison will work, where we should put the little kid so no one's seen. And I don't know if our neighbors hear us and get very worried. And we also used to search very bad things on the internet. So our chronology also is pretty scary.
Does this mean that the police could accidentally show up at Martino's house from
Yes,
your internet research?
So this live recording is for the police. Yes, I was searching how to build a bomb with a cat and a flamethrower, but it was for game design purpose.
That's great. That's great. When you're designing detective mysteries, I find are easier to write when you start with all the information that the players have discovered and work your way back. And I do that just because logically it's consistent as I move backwards. Do you work backwards in a mystery, or are you in different parts of it, or do you move forward?
Yes, we tried several things. We tried starting from the start and seeing what happens. And then we tried starting from the big reveal and finding ways to come to that big reveal in a natural way. And since we are two authors, and sometimes we collaborate with writers, like in the first one and in the one we are writing right now, it's going back and forth. I cannot really tell you what the process is, because it's really a spaghetti process in some in some way.
Okay.
But at some point we come to something that looks like a story that works, and then we have to keep the core of the story and start writing the other subplots and the cards and the objects you find in the game, what people will say, etc. But yes, what we do is basically writing everything that happens in game design documents. So at this time, Bryce enters the kitchen with a knife and he puts the knife under the table, etc. So we can also go back and forth and see what happens in the story when we create the cards. So everything looks smooth when you play the game, because nothing is written without thinking of the actual consequences in the world of the game.
Great. That's fantastic. Well, Silvano, it was nice having you on the show. You are our first guest. It will be for all eternity. The famous one here. Let's hope that there's many more gamer lunches and I can bring you back. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you. I always wanted to be in a pilot. They tell me, if you want to be in a pilot, go to America, and they were right.
Let's just hope this is a pilot that keeps going.
If not, I am in the pilot and also in the series finale, so it's a win-win.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for stopping by. Next week on Gamer Lunch, we're going to have someone who is an editor for DV Jokey Games. His name is Federico Tini, and he's going to talk about his job and his role in the company. So we'll see you next week on Friday for Gamer Lunch. Be sure to check out our social media for the time in your area. And for Gamer Lunch, I'm Bryce Whitaker. My guest has been Silvano Sorrentino. and have a great lunch. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Ciao.